What if the quality of your leadership, your relationships, and even your culture is determined by the quality of the questions you ask? Hi, my name is Marco Blankenburgh, and this is Unlocking Intercultural Agility. For over 25 years, I've worked with people in more than 70 countries. I help them navigate the complexity behind how we think, communicate, and work together. If working with people has ever felt harder than it should, whether through misunderstanding, misalignment, or things not quite clicking, this is what we explore. And in every episode, we share practical ways to build stronger relationships, develop cultural intelligence, and work more effectively with others. And today, I'm very privileged to be joined by Bob Tiede. And well, Bob, I want to welcome you to the show. Thanks to you for making the time.
Marco, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm looking forward to learning from you.
Same here. And before we jump in, Bob, many of our listeners might know about your work, but may not know your story. So maybe you can briefly introduce yourself and what drew you to this, I couldn't say lifelong, but probably a very long fascination with questions.
Well, thank you for asking, Marco. Whenever I speak, I begin with a confession. And my confession is that for most of my career, I was a benevolent dictator. I thought the job of a leader was to figure out what needed to be done. And then I said benevolent. I grew up in a home where I was taught to say please and thank you. So, Marco, if you'd been on my team, I don't think I ever would have said, hey, Marco, go do this. It'd have been more like, hey, Marco, here's what we're working on. It'd really be great if you could please do this. But I still thought I had to figure it out and then kindly tell you what to do using please. And when you did it, to say thank you. Now, for me, that changed in 2006 when I discovered the first edition of the book, Leading with Questions by Dr. Michael Marquardt. I love books. I love leadership books. And probably every leadership book I've ever bought or read, there's been a morsel in there. But I had no idea that day when I bought that book that it would change my leadership forever. As I read that book, it was filled with stories of leaders literally from around the globe, not just the US, who were leading with questions, the questions they were using. And Marco, as I read that book, my thought was, why hasn't anyone ever shared this way to lead with me before? I was an instant convert. And I began to teach out of that book. That was 2006. In 2012, one of my colleagues had started a blog and said, I ran into her at our headquarters and I said, Andrea, you've started a blog. And she said, Bob, you need to start a blog. And I said, why would I want to do that? And we sat down and in 5 minutes, she'd convinced me. Well, the next question is, what would I blog on? And instantly it was like, well, it'd be this leading with question thing. In other words, I didn't want to do just a leadership blog. There's so many good ones. I'd be a small fish in a big ocean. So I was asking, is there a niche of leadership? And as soon as I had that, so my blog is now 14 years old.
Fantastic.
I've written 7 free ebooks. And so many think, well, asking questions must come naturally to Bob. And I say, no, telling comes naturally. But I know that asking questions is so much more effective.
And it's more fun as well.
So, Marco, that's a bit of my background to introduce myself to your listeners.
No, fantastic. And I think that's also when we had our first conversation, that's why we aligned so well, because when, I've now worked internationally for over 30 years, and I was also a teller. I would tell people, I love knowledge. I love knowing. And if people asked me a question and I had the answer, that would always come first. So yeah, I'm on that same journey, I think. I'm still learning. But one thing I did discover that the biggest problem in working interculturally is that we get so focused on our assumptions or our early conclusions of what does this mean, or why did this person say that, or what's going on here. And those early assumptions can only be fine-tuned and made better by observing, listening, and asking better questions. So for me, the journey might have been slightly different than for you, but for me, it was like, I don't understand what's going on here, or I drew the wrong conclusion and I messed up. I need to observe more. I need to ask more questions. I need to find trusted people who are willing to tell me what's going on. And that was my journey towards questions. And I think we both are on the same journey, just coming at it from a different angle. So it's fascinating. Well, let's start with something that you already alluded to, and that is this idea that leaders have this idea that knowing and therefore having the answer makes them more powerful, or makes them more in control or something like that. And why do we get hung up on that, and why are actually questions more powerful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you're given a leadership position, you think, well, as a leader, I'm supposed to have all the answers. I'm supposed to know everything. And so when a staff member asks, "Hey, Bob, what do you think about this? What should we do about that?" The leader, and I'm talking about myself, thinks, well, I'm the leader. I need to know. And Marco, I look back and I laugh. There was times my staff asked me questions. I had no clue what the answer was, but I made one up on the spot, thinking it's my job. And my staff were so kind. None of them ever called me out to say, "Well, Bob, I don't think you really knew. I think you just made that up." But yes, I had. And and so some of it isn't well, at least in American culture. You'll have to educate me on other cultures, but in American culture, the leader often thinks he or she needs to have all the answers. And I always say, what a heavy burden on the shoulders of a leader who thinks they need to have all the answers. Marco, you'll have to tell me how this works in other cultures. But I share that today I'm actually ready to respond to any question I'm asked. And you could think, well, wait a minute, Bob, I just thought you said, you don't have all the answers. Well, Marco, here's how I respond when I'm asked a question I don't know the answer to. I'd say, well, Marco, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. What do you think the answer is? And I find that often they actually have an answer. But if they say, well, Bob, no, I don't know. That's why I came to you. And I say, well, Marco, again, that is a great question. It would benefit both of us to know the answer. Marco, where do you think we could find out the answer? And almost always they immediately have a suggestion. Well, I could Google it. I could go to AI, or there's a book, or they name a person who they think will know. And I say, hey, that is a great idea. Marco, could you go do that research and come back with the answer? Because it will benefit both of us. And so in that way today, I actually can respond. I didn't say answer, but respond to any question that I'm asked.
Yeah.
Always affirming the question. And then together figuring out how could we get the answer.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the work that we do in intercultural development. The starting point is what we call perception management. So am I perceiving right in this situation? And there's always 4 ingredients. So there's perceiving myself. In your case, the leader has all the answers. So I'm perceiving myself as I need to have the answer. And, I've heard people make them up like the example you gave. So who am I in this moment? Who's the person who's asking? That's the second part of perception. Are they truly not knowing? Is it a lack of skill? Is it a lack of knowledge? Are they just insecure? Or are they just saying, hey, Bob gave me the answer last time, so I'm going to go to him again, and he'll give me the answer again, so I can just be lazy. So who am I in this moment? And then also what's happening relationally between us? Is it hierarchy? Is it Is the person who's asking seeing me as more experienced or having more expertise, knowledge? Or is it a conversation of equals? How does that influence the conversation? And then the context. So it's me, it's you, the relationship and the context. And I always dig into that because very often, to your point, interculturally, very often it's how the leader perceives himself. Oh, I need to be strong. I need to be seen as powerful. I need to have all the answers. I can't be seen as weak. And the employee will say, well, I'm just a subordinate, so I go to my boss for the answers to my questions. Or I'm insecure and I don't want to make mistakes. And therefore, it's much safer to ask my boss. Because if I follow his instructions or her instructions, and I mess it up, it's not my fault. So, yeah, so we find that those four are always at play in how people handle the way they ask questions and the way they deal with it.
Those are excellent. Approaching it from another angle, and this is another story, another confession about myself. A number of years ago, I was at a leadership conference, and one of the speakers I saw on the schedule, her name was Liz Wiseman,
Oh,
and
yeah.
she was
Yeah, I
going to
know
be
Liz. Yeah.
on multipliers. And
Excellent.
I thought, well, that's going to be a great session because she's going to be talking about leaders like me. And so I go to the session, and Liz starts with talking about diminishers. Well, when she first mentioned the word diminisher, I thought, well, yeah, that must be these other people here because I am a multiplier. But she started giving examples of what diminishers do. And she said, when you bring a diminisher leader a problem, they solve it for you.
Mm.
And I thought, well, wait a minute, Liz, what? I love solving problems when my staff bring them to me. I thought that was a multiplier trait. But Liz was saying, no, that's a diminisher trait. She said multiplier leaders will ask the staff member questions so that they can come up with their own answer. And it's like I'm sitting there just kind of in unbelief thinking, wow, what I thought was a multiplier trait is a diminisher trait. And then her second example is when you bring a diminisher leader a new idea, they say, great idea, Marco. If you also added this and this and this, it would make it fantastic.
Yeah.
And she said, that's what a diminisher leader does.
Mm.
A multiplier leader will say, man, Marco, great idea. Tell me more. And again, I'm sinking lower in my chair because things that I thought were multiplier were diminisher. And Marco, you've studied this more than me, but even in my experience within American culture, so many leaders, me included, got it all wrong. We thought telling and showing that we have all this knowledge is the best way to lead, and we weren't doing that out of evil intention.
Mm.
Genuinely thought that that's how you lead.
Yeah.
And only discovered, well, I say there's this component of emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you add that with cultural intelligence. But for me, so much of the emotional intelligence was, you touched, Marco, on the topic of staff who, in a sense, go to their leader saying, hey, it'll be safe if I ask him or her what to do, and then I do that. Because if it doesn't work out, I can say, well, I tried to do what you said to do.
Yeah.
And, but a leader who will ask, hey, Marco, what do you think would be the best way forward here? And genuinely listen and say, wow, Marco, I love that. That's really wise. Go forward with that idea, execute on it. And some of the emotional intelligence there is when I genuinely ask, and I realize in every culture that may take time to make the staff member feel like I really want to know and that it's safe to answer. But I know for most of us, when our leader has genuinely asked us, hey, what do we think? We feel valued. Like
Absolutely.
my leader, without him or her saying, Bob, I think you're smart. I think you have some wisdom. Just by asking and listening, they communicated that. But then another element of emotional intelligence, Marco, one of my friends said, when you tell a staff member what to do, they might write it down, they might even attempt to do it, but they don't own it. When it
Absolutely.
doesn't work, they say, well, maybe they even say, I didn't think that would work.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
when you ask them what they think, and you say, wow, I love that. And
Yeah.
sometimes as a leader in your own head, you have to think, I think I would climb the mountain this way, but they're suggesting climbing it this way.
Yeah.
But here's what I know. If I let them climb it their way, they own it.
And they'll
If I
be
say
more
you
motivated
climb
as
it my
well.
way, again, they may think, well, you signed my paycheck, so I better do what you want. But when it doesn't work, they don't own it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating because interculturally, the uh, the amount of trust I have in the person on the other side of the table determines how likely I will pursue something with my whole heart. So, on the one hand, is if I have high trust in you, and you do say, well, have you thought about this or have you thought about this? If I walk away and do it, I will have a high level of commitment. I'll be resilient about it. I will put 120% in it. If the trust is low, even if you tell me what to do, likely I will not do it with my whole heart and I will not be highly motivated. So there is a relational component as well, I find. And that's something that fascinated me because you're already alluding to this idea that good questions don't just improve communication, it also changes the relationship. So, can you tell me more about that? What have you seen? How does the relationship shift if you engage from a question centric perspective?
um, well, I go back to something I just said a moment ago, and that is, Marco, how have you felt when you've had a leader, someone you reported to, ask you in a genuine way, hey, Marco, what do you think would be best here? How did that make you feel?
Yeah, no, absolutely valued, heard.
Yeah.
Um, it might take me
Now,
by surprise
yeah.
sometimes. Yeah.
Now, if you've been a leader who only leads by telling, and you say, okay, I've just heard this, that I can ask. So my next meeting with staff member, I'm going to say, hey, Marco, what do you think? If that comes as a shock to the staff member, or if you said there's this kind of lack of trust hasn't yet been built,
Mm-hmm.
that staff member may feel like this is a trick.
Ah,
If
yes.
I say something wrong, I'm going to get fired. I don't know what to say. And so maybe I'll end up just saying, I don't know. Even
Mm-hmm.
though I have an idea, I instinctively want to stay safe. And again, as I've shared earlier, my experience, Marco, is primarily in American culture. But a few years ago, we took a group of leaders on the behind the scenes tour at Walt Disney World.
Mm.
And I was looking forward to it. We were going to go to some spots that the guests never see, the underground at the Magic Kingdom. But we got on the bus and they said our first stop is going to be the Walt Disney Laundry Services. And I
Hey,
thought, laundry services? Who wants to see the laundry services?
that's
Well, it turned out it was the best stop of the whole day from a leadership lesson point of view. As we were driving on the bus, they shared that turnover at Walt Disney Laundry Services had been 85%.
wow.
It was so a year, 85% a year. It was so bad that they were thinking we need to outsource this. We have no capacity to do this well. And then they got new leadership. And the new leadership began to ask the staff, everybody at Walt Disney World is a cast member. even if you're in laundry service. So they began to ask the cast members, hey, what could we do to make your job easier or better? What ideas do you have that would serve our guests better? But they said when they began to ask, the staff didn't answer. It had been such a negative culture, such top down. They thought it was a trick. If we say anything bad, for sure we'll be fired.
Yeah.
It actually took about 2 months of staff, the leaders genuinely asking, trying to build relationships, saying that we need your input. Your answers will benefit all. Nobody's going to be fired for their answer. And when the staff begin to answer, sometimes leaders think, well, if I ask my staff, what could we do to make your job better here? That they're going to ask for the ridiculous. Well, double our wages.
Mm-hmm.
Give us all brand new cars. And it's like, but in actuality, Marco, that's never how staff answer. And at Walt Disney World, they're working in laundry services, and it was hot where they worked. And Orlando, Florida is hot. And they said, it's hot in here. Is there any way that each of us could have an air conditioning vent blowing on us? Well, the leadership worked in an air conditioned office when they went out, and they thought, oh my goodness, if I worked here, I'd want an air conditioning vent. And they said, sure, we can do that. The second thing they said is we spend a good part of our day folding towels, folding sheets, folding napkins. And we're all different heights. Some of us, this table is exactly right, but those of us taller, we have to bend over. Those of us shorter have to reach up. Is there any way this table could go up and down?
Mm.
And leadership thought, well, sure, that's a simple answer.
Yeah.
And then they had an idea on improving service. They said, we never get to see how the stuff we do here gets used. Could we, spend a day working with a maid who's making up rooms in our hotels to see how things are being done? And again, leadership said, sure. Well, fast forward today, turnover at Walt Disney Laundry Services is less than 15% a year.
Fantastic.
And staff come and stay until they retire. And it all happened when leadership began to ask two questions. What could we do to make your job easier? What ideas do you have that would serve our guests better? But Marco, it took time to build the relationship so that the staff there knew that it was safe to answer.
Yeah.
And of course, as they begin to answer, leadership affirmed them, thanked them, appreciate. But then they also, I think in any situation, Marco, if you ask me for my input and I share my input and you say, oh, Bob, thank you so much, but I never see my input ever used.
Yes.
In a while, I'll quit giving input.
Yeah.
And so the fact that the cast members there gave input, and they probably thought, but nothing will ever happen. Yeah, we've said this before. It doesn't change anything. But when they begin to see that their input was actually being implemented, well, of course, then it completed the cycle. I was asked, I gave input, and something was done.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the golden rule, right? When leaders say, oh, we need to start listening to our staff. And then the golden rule is you have to act on it within 21 to 45 days. Otherwise, people actually lower their trust again. They might have opened the door a little bit and now nothing happens. They slam the door shut again. Yeah. No, that's a great example. It's sometimes, we work quite a bit with teachers who teach sometimes like 15 nationalities in a classroom. And I still remember the first time a teacher who initially had said, you know what, I've learned my pedagogy. I know how education works. And therefore, I'm going to copy paste what I learned back in, I forgot where she was from. It was either Australia or South Africa. I'm going to copy paste what I learned there about pedagogy into my classroom. And the first thing that she came back to me with was, Marco, I don't know why, but I seem to be losing credibility with the parents. And we started to, I started to just listen to her stories as to what she thinks might be happening. And eventually we discovered that in her education and with the kids that she was trained to teach, if a teacher gets a question from a pupil, then it's easy for the teacher to say, well, here's the answer. But it's better to allow the pupils together to wrestle a little bit with the question and collectively come up with an answer. So a classical way to do that is by saying, well, Johnny, or Ahmed, that was a good question. Class, what do you think? So happened to be that there were a number of families in that class who were more from I would call it Confucianistic learning system, where the teacher knows both all the questions and knows all the answers. So the kids went home and said, I asked this question from my teacher and she didn't know the answer. So the conclusion of the parent was, this must be a bad teacher. And they came back to the school with that complaint. So the teacher had to figure out, okay, how can I make sure that the students know I know the answer to the question, but I want you to discover the answer yourself. So she had to shift how she navigated that. Instead of saying, that's a good question, Ahmed, class, what do you think? Instead of that, now saying, that's a good question, Ahmed. And I think as a class, we need to work together to find the answer to that question. And let's do it this way. And then she would send them off on small table assignments and see what they come up with. And it was just such a simple thing, but it actually caused her as a teacher to lose credibility initially. And later on, she became one of the most respected teachers in the class once she discovered how to interculturally navigate that situation.
I've heard something similar in that in certain cultures, where the staff would ask the leader a question and the leader would say, wow, that's a great question. I don't know the answer. What do you think? That staff would be embarrassed for their leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
Then
like, ooh.
it becomes an honor issue. Yeah. Yeah. So you've already alluded to it, sort of, that, of course, the two of us believe that questions are powerful. But we've also both have had our seasons in life where we thought answers were more powerful. We've already alluded to a few things that stand in the way. But if we could just dig in on that question a little bit, why are we, if we just put the cultural thing aside, because in some cultures, indeed, if there's a strong hierarchical culture, if there is a strong culture of, like I mentioned, the Confucianistic learning system, where the teacher is the wise counsel, or where the business leader is the one who became the business leader because they know. But besides that, what stands in the way? What causes us to not be willing to go in the direction of being more question-oriented?
I'm sure there's a variety of things. As I think about that, I think that, and again, I only have my American culture, and so you'll have to tell me if this is true in other cultures. Instinctively, I go wrong because I think I'm a fascinating person. If I can tell Marco everything about me, he will love me and want to know me, and it'll really go well. What I miss is that when you meet a new person and you do all the talking because you think they will love hearing all about me, and they might smile and be nodding their head and you're thinking they're enjoying it, but inside their head they may well be thinking, what a windbag. At least a description an American might make. But if we meet that new person and we, out of curiosity, ask them questions where they do most of the talking, the reality is that person may well think, wow, I like this guy, Marco. I trust him. I'm feeling this trust. I appreciate it. And Marco and Bob are thinking, well, how could you be feeling that? You don't even know anything about me. Well, what they do know is they've experienced someone listening to them.
Right.
And in experiencing that, they feel trust. And I think in America, where we often go wrong, is thinking that I need to have all the answers, but also I am, if I can only share all the good things about me, this person will love me. And we don't understand the emotional intelligence of being genuinely curious and being working on being a listener and even understanding how to ask the question. Marco, you might comment on this. Um, Something I've just learned recently is what we emphasize in asking a question, just the tone of asking. If I say, hey, Marco, what do you think you should do? In other words, I emphasize the last part of that question. Marco, what do you think you should do? Versus, hey, Marco, what do you think you should do? I don't know if I'm doing that well, but the person
No, it shifts
saying,
things.
if we put the accent on the first part and then lower our voice on the second part, it feels much different than if we put the accent on the end. And he said, naturally, in asking questions, we naturally put the accent on the end of the question.
Yeah.
Not understanding. And I just thought, that's something I've never thought about before.
That's powerful.
But yeah, it makes a big difference.
You used the word curiosity, and I think the flip side of that is, curiosity only comes alive if I truly believe that there's something I still don't know or still don't understand or a perspective I still need. And I've worked with leaders where that curiosity itself was almost like an orange or a red flag for them because it meant that they wouldn't be in control. So this whole idea of in coaching, we talk about that a coach doesn't bring the content, the coach brings the process. And the idea that curiosity means I still miss content. And for quite a few leaders I've worked with, that's almost a fearful place to be. So shifting, I still remember I worked with a leader for almost a year, and I asked him, I said, I won't mention his name, but I said, I'm waiting for the day where you comfortably and confidently can walk into a meeting and not have a pre-designed answer to one of the agenda items. And he looked at me and says, that's never going to happen. And it did in the end. It did actually. He learned that was a beautiful way to lead, where he didn't bring the content, but he brought the process, which includes asking questions and getting people to work together. And I thought that was just a beautiful discovery. And the other thing I would say, and I've bumped into that. I was in the military in the Netherlands, and I was with the special forces, and the captain. When I left, I got a special award, and the captain did a mini speech, and he said, "Blankenburgh, when you joined our unit, I thought you were an arrogant guy. I won't use his words." And he said, "But then I discovered you actually know a lot." And once we saw beyond that, you're actually not too bad a guy to work with. And that was, to me, it was really interesting as a reprimand, but also he was trying to give a compliment. But the reprimand was really pointing to ego. And this whole idea that if you know, your ego can be attached to it. And to me, that moment when I finished my military service, I realized, yeah, if even if I know, if the result of me sharing my knowledge results in people thinking I'm arrogant or egocentric, that's not where I want to be. That's not the leader I want to be. So for me, that was like a big aha moment.
Well, Marco, when I think about asking questions, here's another paradigm I think about. Um, a leader who thinks they need to have all the answers. Um, let's just say they're having a staff meeting. Their staff are around the conference table, and there's an opportunity for the team. And if the leader thinks it's his or her job to figure out how to take advantage of the opportunity and then tell the staff what you want them to do, I always say, well, there's only one mental ore in the water. But a leader who shares the opportunity and then looking around that table says, what do you all think we might do here?
Hmm.
I always say, what are the odds, the probability that that leader might hear an idea better than what he or she is thinking? Well, just the fact that now you're hearing 5, 6, 7, depending how many staff ideas, the probability goes up. It's
Yeah.
not a guarantee, but by hearing 5, 6 ideas, it's certainly possible that we think, wow, Matilda shared an idea, and the leader thinks, wow, that's better than anything I was thinking.
Hmm.
Um, Matilda, would you lead our team in executing on that? And
Yeah.
and so that leader can be more effective. They're hearing more ideas, but again, emotional intelligence, letting Matilda run with her idea and affirming it. You've got her whole heart. And another scenario is the team starts building on Matilda's idea. Tommy says, wow, that's great. We could do this. And Joanne jumps in, and we could also add this. And now the idea that they're going to execute on, my terms, all the teams can see their fingerprints on it.
Hmm.
Where they
Hmm.
now, instead of we're doing what the boss says, no, we've created this together, and we now own it together. We're excited about it because we all got to help shape it. Um, and for a leader to understand that the team culture, regardless of the culture of that country, but the team culture now is a collaborative culture.
Hmm.
Um, there are again within America a whole lot of top-down business cultures.
Yeah.
We got to do
Yeah.
what the boss says. But a team that begins to have that collaborative, but a leader can't move a team from I've always been top down to collaborative overnight.
No,
There's
absolutely
no
not.
30-second approach there. It goes
Yeah.
back to that Walt Disney story. It took 2 months and probably even took longer.
It typically takes longer. Yeah, it reminds me of a team I worked with where the political climate is much more dictatorial, and they were an international company, but all local staff. And they had expressed to the leadership, we don't want to copy paste the local political culture into our company. We want something else. And I had the privilege of being involved with them, which was a nationwide organization. And I told them from the beginning, to your point, this is not going to be a 2-day workshop. It took a year and a half, actually, of little by little shifting the people that were there, but even also shifting the people that didn't belong there, that really wanted this top down. The boss tells me what to do. I just go and ask my boss what I need to do and follow their marching orders. But that takes time, especially if the outside culture is not used to it. And getting leaders to ask questions from each other, receive questions as to, hey, can you explain to me why that was done in this particular way? Even just receiving a question like that was in the beginning hard for them. So yeah, culture shift takes a lot of time. We talked about, what might stop leaders from behaving this way. The flip side is also true. How do you stay curious? How do you keep, because our brain naturally wants to make shortcuts, and asking questions is like a mini pause. It's all, if you're not practiced, it can be quite a long pause. Instead of answering, to say, how do I turn this conversation into a question? And those pauses, your brain just doesn't like them. It wants to just move ahead, shortcuts, save energy. How do you stay curious? How does that work?
Well, I have a comment there, or a thought, and that is some of the research I've discovered, not mine, but of research I've discovered. I'll share it this way. Before I understood this research, even when I asked a question, it was like, ask a question. I ask Marco a question, Marco answers. Okay, that completes the cycle, move on. What the research I found was that when you ask somebody a question where they're required to share an opinion, it's not just, hey, which way to the bank while you go down the street, a factual thing, but an opinion, that people instinctively roll out a safe answer. They're testing the water. And so you ask that question, you get the first answer, and you move on. You didn't actually get to their gold nugget, their best thought.
Yeah.
You get there by asking up to 3 times, wow, Marco, that's good. What else? Well, by affirming what you've heard so far and say, hey, Marco, that's really good. Say more about that. Well, Marco relaxes. Bob appreciates what I'm sharing, and now he is feeling comfortable to say more. But even then, don't move on at the second answer. Say something like, wow, Marco, I've got to take notes. I'm grabbing a pen. This is so good. I've got to take notes here. Please continue. You actually get to their gold nugget on their third and fourth answer. So in curiosity, we can think, well, I asked a question, I got an answer. I showed my curiosity. But we genuinely show the curiosity when we ask the second and third question.
That's so good.
And
yeah.
It's not an interrogation, but genuinely.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned something else. I heard the word silent. Silence can also work for us. We're genuinely bothered by it. But if I ask Marco a question requiring you to share an opinion, and you give the first answer and you pause, if I immediately jump in because I'm bothered with the silence, well, you'll say no more. But if I just keep comfortable eyesight like I'm expecting more, that person will actually say more. And
very
then,
true.
Yeah, Marco, there's another story. Creating a culture in which people feel safe. It takes some time. And again, I don't know how this would work in all cultures, but one of my friends in the US is Cheryl Batchelder. Now, Cheryl, for many years, was the CEO of a fast food restaurant called Popeye's Chicken. And they have, thousands of stores across the United States and maybe other countries also. When she took over, shares were trading at $10 a share. 6-7 years later, they sold the company to a Canadian firm, but shares were trading at $60 a share.
Wow.
And Cheryl wrote a book called Dare to Serve, in which she shares how she used servant leadership to turn Popeyes around. But in that book, she asks this question: how well do you know your staff? You know the 3 or 4 events that have most shaped who they are today. And that has become one of my favorite questions. Now, what Cheryl was suggesting was for a manager of a Popeyes restaurant, he wasn't suggesting line your staff up and one by one ask, what are the 3 to 4 events that have most shaped your life? But over time, as you're getting to know those staff, asking those questions.
Mm.
And then, of course, once you kind of know an answer, there'll be times a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later to inquire about some of those, getting an
Yeah.
update on
Yeah.
it. But what she was saying is when staff feel like my boss, my leader, actually knows me. Some places, again, I don't know how this is around the world, but in some places, I think staff wonder, does the boss even know my name? He keeps calling me buddy. Hey, you. And it's easy to leave a place where you feel like they don't know my story. They don't actually know anything about me.
Yeah.
All they want me to do is come here and do the job, but they don't care about me.
It's
Well,
fascinating.
in a place where they care, where you feel like they care about me,
Mm-hmm.
uh, again, it feels safer. It's more like, hey, I trust that leader. Uh, Even if they're telling me stuff, I trust them. But when they ask, I feel safe to answer.
Yeah, and it is confirmed if you look at the international research. The biggest project on figuring out leadership across cultures is called the Globe Project, the Globe Leadership Project, and one of the 6 confirmed leadership traits is humane leadership or benevolent leadership, and part of that is knowing, engaging. So understanding your people's world, understanding their needs, their hopes, their dreams, and what you mentioned, coming back to it, actually remembering, not just asking and 1 year in and 1 year out, but
Yeah.
actually coming back to it. So it is actually one of those universal things that I might be done slightly different in different cultural settings, but in general, it's a human need to be seen, to be heard, to be noticed. So I think that's really important. I've had the privilege of reading your books, and when I first thought about the subject of questions, it's like, okay, we've got leading with questions, third edition that you and Professor Michael published together. Then you've got 6 other books, I think, that you've published yourself that are available from your website.
What if one powerful question could completely change how you understand someone from another culture? The right questions unlock perspectives, build trust, and create deeper connections. The ultimate intercultural questions game gives you practical questions to navigate conversations that go beneath the surface. Find it in the description and start asking better questions today.
I thought that, harvesting a few questions and you'll be done with it. But even your blog, when I read your blog, there's so many authors that have different angles to questions. You challenged us to take the intercultural angle, and we harvested over 1,000 intercultural questions to ask. How do we stay curious? How do you have a system where you keep a library, or how do you keep adding questions that are helpful, that are enriching, that allow you to engage more effectively with others? How do you do it?
Well, Marco, I'll share this story. I did it out of a need. um, when I launched my blog 14 years ago, I decided to post on Mondays and Thursdays twice a week. And so I launched, and 8 weeks later, 16 posts into this experience, and now there's almost 1,500 posts, but 16 posts into it, I had a crisis. I was completely out of content. I'd said everything I knew about leading with questions. I had nothing more to say. And I sat here at my desk and I prayed one of those quickie prayers that I say even agnostics pray from time to time, and that's, Lord, what do I do now? And instantly the thought came to me was to do a little Google research. This was before AI, a little Google research to see, could I find anyone else that was blogging in this niche of leading with questions? Well, even to this date, I found no one that's exclusively blogging in this niche, but every time I look, I find posts on other blogs that relate to this theme. Well, that morning I did some research. I identified 5 posts that I thought were really good. I figured out the email address of the blogger, and I sent off 5 emails asking if I might have their permission to repost their post as a guest post on my blog, full attribution to them. Promised I'd do nothing without their permission, and I hit send. I didn't know if that would work. Within 24 hours, I had 5 yeses. And today I'm much more a curator than an originator.
Yeah.
But all my subscribers are the beneficiary, and I'm the beneficiary, because now we're learning from great leaders literally around the globe, not just American leaders, but leaders everywhere, and men and women, and all the different angles. And it's like almost every time I discover and invite another author to contribute their guest post, there's an angle there on asking questions that I hadn't thought of before.
That's wonderful.
And or a question I hadn't thought of before, or a situation, or an angle. And like, I just shared even this weekend, it's not yet a post, but just the tone of what we emphasize. Do we emphasize, put the accent on the end of the question, changes the feeling. I'd never ever thought of that. And so my curiosity came out of need. If I was going to continue the blog, and now when others ask me, if they're a blogger, whatever the topic, and ask me if I have any advice, well, one of the things I try to share is, have you considered being a curator, not just an originator?
Yeah.
Where you can learn on that topic, and your subscribers from the experts around the world, those who've experienced success on that topic around the world. So that's how I got there, Marco.
That's awesome. And it, originator versus curator, it also comes back to what we do as coaches to move away from providing the content. You ran out after a few weeks, after a few episodes, to providing the process where other people's ideas can flow. So that's one way where you kept it alive, but this is your life's work. So what about ordinary people? What about, people listening to us today? How do they put questions at the center of their life intentionally? What would it look like for ordinary people on a day-to-day basis?
That is a fabulous question. I work with leaders in one country that's a closed country. I can't share the name, but when I started there, it was very, very fascinating. The response they began to receive from the people that they worked with, their teams, was, wow, we've never seen questions in the way in which Bob is describing them. In their culture, it was like, don't ask questions, because questions are used to embarrass people. Questions are used to show somebody they're not intelligent. In other words, that they lack intelligence. And so you ask them a question, and yep, they don't have an answer, what proves. And they said they just had never seen questions that could be used to build relationships. And when they began to see that, it was like, wow. And in those teams, they begin to quickly include and begin to use those within that framework. And so, again, they weren't becoming authors, they weren't becoming bloggers, but it was a paradigm shift in their mind that not all, they had a framework that all questions like don't ask because you're asking to embarrass somebody. And a polite person would never do something to embarrass. But now they've shifted to say, oh, there are questions that can be used to actually build relationships, and questions that people actually enjoy answering and sharing about themselves when you ask. So, I say to listeners, just my favorite question is, what do you think? And so whatever the topic, there's always a topic you add to that. You don't just walk up to somebody and say, what do you think? You would, some topic, hey, what do you think would be the best way here? And then listening and saying, wow, that's good. What else? You can actually move rather quickly. And then there's another, we've alluded to it, or I have, it's asking the second and third question.
That's really good. Yeah.
Somebody says, I just got back from this trip to such and such a place. Wow, tell me more about your trip. And so they tell you a little bit more about the trip and what they did. And one of the things they said is I so enjoyed the food there. Wow, tell me about the food. What was what kind of food? What made it so tasty for you? Again, not an inquisition, but in every answer, there's something we can ask about. Now, so often, I also say, don't hijack the conversation. Marco, if I said, hey, where have you been lately? And you said, oh, I just got back from Paris. Paris, I love Paris. Let me tell you about my trip to Paris.
Yes, that's the worst thing. Yes.
Yeah, there's something within us that if we've experienced something, have some knowledge of what Marco has just shared, I want to quickly tell Marco about my experience.
Yeah.
And I say, no, don't do that. You've asked Marco questions. So, Marco, where'd you go in Paris? And what do you most enjoy? And within your answer, I can ask a second, but stay with that, because that will allow Marco to be able to share. And here's the counterintuitive thing. The more I let Marco speak, the more Marco trusts me, the more Marco thinks, man, this is a great conversation. We all want to be listened to. And if I can just, one thing, if you can think that other person actually wants to be listened to, and if I'll ask questions and keep eyesight and ask the second and the third question, that other person actually feels cared about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. One other habit that I learned initially on paper, but I'm now doing it with AI, is there was like a 5-minute journaling exercise at the end of the day. A small block of aha moments, milestones, or things accomplished, things to follow up on, which could include research, and great questions. And that was always the fourth block. Great questions that somebody asked, or that I might have asked myself, and I surprised myself with it. And then now with AI, we actually use a tool that summarizes meetings, where you can program the tool to summarize meetings in a certain way. So I've programmed a question block. So were any great questions asked in this meeting, please extract them into this block. So the summary of the meeting actually has a special great questions block. And I found that super helpful, using technology in a way that allows me to remember the questions that were asked.
Marco, that is fabulous, fabulous. And another story comes to mind. One of our U.S. state governors was every morning was meeting. It was a female governor. Every morning she was meeting with her staff while the legislature was in session. And they would, what she was wanting to do was get staff input on the bills that were being introduced.
Mm-hmm.
But she's walking back to her office on this tile floor. Her high heels are clicking, and her chief of staff knows she's not happy. They get into her office, shut the door, and she says, "Why won't my staff talk?" And he said to her, "Well, ma'am, maybe you need to be quiet." And she looked at him like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, they share that a certain bill is being introduced, and you immediately share your opinion, and then you ask them what they think." And he said, "No one wants to argue with the governor or take a stand different than the governor." He said, "Why don't you, when they say, here's a bill, ask, what do you all think? Not share your opinion instantly and get their input." And that simple change changed it.
Totally.
Starting the very next day, she got the input of hearing the different angles that she actually wanted to hear by not being the first one to tell her opinion.
It's fascinating how many leaders, especially more alpha-oriented, if you know, that's a familiar term, the go-getters of the world, I've heard say, "Oh, so I should be the last one to speak in the meeting."
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Get solicit from the people in the meeting first, and yeah. We've shared a lot of practical advice, a lot of great examples and stories. I really appreciate it. I think we could talk for a lot longer. I'm just looking at the clock, and our podcast producer will say, "Hey, what do I cut out?" And I will have to tell him nothing. Keep everything like it is. But maybe as we wrap up, just to put you on the spot, Bob, what is maybe one question that really changed your life? And maybe I'll give you a chance, because as I was thinking about that question myself, I remember I was facilitating a session, and there was a gentleman in the back, and he was very participative. It was a big group, and after the meeting, he came up to me and he said to me, "Marco, I can see that you are gifted in facilitating, but I can also see that you are still scared to step into that gift." And he said, "When will you step into not just the gifting, but when will you step into the authority of that gifting?" And I struggled a little bit to understand the wording that he used, and that only dawned on me later on in life. And it was such a powerful question. I wrestled with it for many weeks until I finally understood, yeah, I might have the gift, but I'm not stepping into the authority of that gift. And it really changed my life. So I'm curious, what was a question for you that was life-changing?
Well, I'm sure there's many. Here's just a thought, and I do have one question in mind, but so often, one of my favorite scriptures is, "Man plans his way, but God orders our footsteps." And I think for all of us, again, you don't have to be a believer, but if you look at your life, there are certain things where you say, wow, in that moment, that interaction, as you said, that question, the person who asked that conversation, a minute, a couple minutes, but something happened. And as a result, all of these other things happened. And if you said, what was the spark? It goes back to that one thing. And at the time, we might not even realize that a spark was taking place where the explosion would be continuing on and on. And I alluded to it. Back, I'd already had the Leading with Question book. I was teaching out of it. But in 2012, when one of my colleagues had started a blog and said, I said, Andrea, you started a blog? And she said, Bob, you need to start a blog. And I said, why would I want to do that? And she said, let's sit down. You could say, Bob, well, Marco, she told you you ought to start a blog. It really wasn't a question, but the conversation was a spark, and she was really asking. It might have been even a leading kind of question. Don't you think you ought to start a blog?
Mm-hmm.
But the result of that conversation, and I've thanked her many times since. Andrea, did you have any idea on that day and that little interaction that what would happen? But that was the spark that created
Fantastic.
all of this.
Yeah. Wow.
Ended up being life-changing. And so, I say that in fact, it's a question. The question you've asked me here is a question I love to ask leaders too, is what have been some of those sparks where even at the time you didn't realize that little interaction, that little experience was going to result in shaping a significant part of the future of your life.
Yeah.
For those of us who are married, seeing her for the first time.
I remember that.
On that first occasion, I didn't even know if she'd say yes to a date.
Yeah.
But you look back and there was that time, and here's all the results. And now, 4 adult children, all married, 9 grandchildren, and so many more things. But go back to a spark.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I really appreciate our conversation, and it's sad that we have to wrap up, but we do have to bring it to a close. And just at the end to say that, when you think about our world, unfortunately, we live in a world where there's more polarization. There is more complexity, especially working in the global scene. There's also less certainty. And I think in the midst of that, where it's very tempting, especially for leaders, to just speed up and tick boxes and get things done as fast as possible, to actually slow down long enough. And coming back to what I said at the beginning, who am I in this moment? Who are you in this moment? Who are we together in this moment? Why is this happening in this context? What do I know about the context? And to slow down enough and to ask better questions, to be more human while AI is seemingly taking over. And I think one of the most human things to do is to see each other, to hear each other, to listen, create space for each other's stories and ask better questions. So thank you so much, Bob, for joining. And we will put your contact details in the notes where people can pick up your books. We'll also put notes in for the Intercultural Question book and the game that we developed. So if you're listening to this, check out the notes, get in contact with Bob, and learn to ask better questions, but also contribute questions where we can learn from you. So thank you, Bob, for joining for this hour. It's been fantastic. I really enjoyed this.
Marco, it's been my privilege. I've loved this, and let's do it again in the future.
Before you go, let me leave you with something you might enjoy exploring. What if a single question could open up a completely new intercultural conversation? Over the years, working with leaders and teams in more than 70 countries, I've seen how the right question can unlock understanding, build trust, and reveal perspectives we didn't know were there. That's why we created the Ultimate Intercultural Questions game. It's a collection of carefully crafted questions designed to help individuals, teams, families, and organizations explore culture, worldview, and identity together. Many people tell us that these questions lead to conversations they've never had before, conversations that deepen relationships and expand the way we see the world. If you're curious, you can learn more about the Ultimate Intercultural Questions game and book in the link below. And perhaps your next meaningful conversation will begin with a simple question.